the city of Compton, a major thoroughfare for prostitution and sex trafficking was Long Beach Boulevard. And it was literally filled with 2 to 3 girls and women on each corner for a stretch of a mile. And none of those girls were working what they call as freelancers.
The Ms. Texas Show is a voice of hope for victims, survivors, advocates, and community leaders against gender-based violence to share their stories and resources. We began showcasing life in Texas. Today we are impacting lives not only in Texas, but also around the world. Under our segment Military Time, we run this segment in partnership with the National Veterans Chamber of Commerce. We invite military and veterans who have overcome traumatic events to share their experiences during and after their military service. Under our beauty segment, we invite fellow pageant winners and contestants, artists, musicians, actors, models, and dancers, and last but not least, our survivor leaders from family violence, sex trafficking, sexual assault, stalking, and other traumatic events who are ambassadors for these causes to share their lives and the impact they have made. To become a guest on our show, email us at MsUSATexas@gmail.com. If you would like to support victims and survivors of gender-based violence, make a tax-deductible donation to Hope Pyx Global at www.hopyxglobal.org.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of the Miss Texas Show, and I am your host, Eileen Dong. And today we have a special guest. He is an author and a nominee of the International Book Awards. And welcome, Mr. Fred Reynolds.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me be here.
Well, yeah, Fred, your book is very intriguing with the title Saint Bloodbath. So before we dive into that, tell us more about you. Like, have you always been an author? What do you do? How did you think about write this book?
No, it's funny. I never thought about being an author. I was a police officer for 32 years, and I retired in 2017. And I had been keeping notes throughout my career, starting the last 10 or 15 years. And, in the hopes that maybe I might write a memoir after I retired. And when I did retire, I kind of, I played around. I wasn't really serious with it. And then I had a heart attack in 2020 and almost died. And, the thought went through my head that, wow, I could have died without actually finishing the book that I had intended on writing. So after I recovered, I wrote my first book, which is called Black, White, and Gray All Over. And it's a memoir of my life as a law enforcement officer, and also as my life as a Black man growing up in the United States during a kind of racist time in the country. And it won an award last year in the Hope International Book Awards. So that gave me motivation to write a second book.
Well, congratulations and thank you for your service. I cannot say enough. In my work, I work with a lot of law enforcement, and you put your lives on the forefront in order for us to have a safe community. And just for that, I really thank you and congratulations for the award. And I'm really, really close to my heart and pleased to hear that because you won the award and that inspired you to write another book. And yes. That being said, I can actually relate to you how you talk about you had this memoir and all the notes and wanting to write a memoir and then put it off because of life and things happen. But then I'm sorry to hear that you had a heart attack, but that inspired you to do the books, not just one book, but the books. So I really
Yeah.
commend you for doing that. So tell us more about, what did you do in the law enforcement? Like, where are you located at, and well, what types of crime did you use to deal with?
Okay. I worked in the city of Compton, California, for about 15 years, and I was a homicide investigator, and I also worked in the gang unit. And Compton was a very violent city during that time. It's a small city, probably 10 square miles, and the population's under 100,000, but there were still 78 to 80 murders every year. So if you take the number of murders that were occurring every year and put them in that small area, it was literally almost like a murder a day, right? So I dealt with that, and then the Compton Police Department was disbanded, and the LA County Sheriff's Department started policing the city. And I went over to the Sheriff's Department. And when I got to the Sheriff's Department, I worked the gang unit for a number of years before being promoted to homicide. And I ended up working homicide for the last 5 years of my career for the LA County Sheriff's Department. So all total between the Compton Police Department and the Sheriff's Department, I ended up with 32 years when I retired in 2017. But most of my career, I worked homicides and violent crimes dealing with gang members.
Wow, wow. I'm curious because this is like ongoing but sort of like ever-changing kind of crime, particularly nowadays with the internet and the technology. So my areas of expertise, for instance, are like, human trafficking, sexual assault, domestic violence. With that regard, the technology related to that, like, cybersecurity, online sexual exploitation, sextortion, etc. Curious, prior to that, when you were working in the LAPD, LA County Police Department, what did you see? Like, because there are gang related human trafficking rings. Homicide can be related to domestic violence and human trafficking. So what's the relationship, if you can fill a scene audience about that?
But yeah, there's a close correlation between with the gang members and the human trafficking. A lot of the gang members are pimps, and they would have these women working for them on the boulevard, selling their bodies to make money for them. They weren't selling their bodies to make money for the entire gang per se, but a lot of the pimps were members of the gangs, and that was a source of income for them. And they would have girls as young as 12 years old prostituting themselves on major boulevards throughout the cities that I worked. For example, in the city of Compton, a major thoroughfare for prostitution and sex trafficking was Long Beach Boulevard. And it was literally filled with 2 to 3 girls and women on each corner for a stretch of a mile. And none of those girls were working what they call as freelancers or renegades, right? That's a woman that sells her body independently without any sex trafficking being involved. You can't do that because these gang members and these pimps, they would come and they would force these women to work for them. They would also uh, find girls that are having problems at home, and they would exploit that and put them on the streets and make them work. And that's how girls as young as 12 and 13 years old come to be involved in sex trafficking and selling themselves on the street. And a lot of times they would kidnap uh, girls that come into this country for a better life, and they would force them to sell their bodies. So sex trafficking was a big part of the gang culture in LA County, and it still is.
I'm curious because there has been this year was the legislative session year, and a lot of the laws has passed, and one of them that I have supported in Texas is SB 49 to increase the crime victim compensation from 1,800 to 5,000. So we're very pleased that it will be effective in September on the
Yes.
1st. But with the change of the policies, and back in the days, like myself, I didn't even know that's called human trafficking. You talked about the boulevard. I recall I was in San Diego County, in Oceanside, and I think you talked about the boulevard. Now it's a little bit vague. I would say it's probably Oceanside Boulevard or El Camino Real, one of those roads. I was walking there because I was waiting for my girlfriend to pick me up to go to the CVS at the time. And she was like, "Oh, I have some trouble with my car." So I'm like, "I'm just gonna go walk there." So long story short, I walked from point A to point B with the destination of CVS. And there was this, and I really don't remember was a truck or whatever, but there was this guy pulled off. So imagine I'm on the pedestrian walking this way, he's driving this way facing me. He pulled off, and that was many years ago, and I didn't really understand what is going on because I came from China. But he
Right.
was like, "How much?" And at that time, that was the first time I heard that, and I was shocked. I'm like, "Huh? What?" So that
Yeah.
just like that, but I just ran. I literally ran, called my girlfriend. She was like, "Call the police now." So that's what
Yeah.
happened. But as I was walking, and if you imagine, we're crossing the path, so our path would never pass across again unless he turned around, and he did. So I was continuing
Right.
to run that way towards the CVS because my girlfriend said, "Call the police, and you need to go to like a public, store or something, not just by
Right.
yourself on the street." So he came around, and he was like, I've got, no, something like 15, 30 minutes, something like that. He told me that. And then my girlfriend heard that because she was still on the phone. She was like, "Pretend you're talking to the police." So I
Hmm.
pretend I was talking to the police, and I just kept running, and eventually it went to that, but he heard I was, so he sort of backed off. But that was, I didn't even understand. So afterwards I talked to my girlfriend. They were like, "Wow, that is the street." I'm like, "Huh? What street?" I didn't have the clue. But but
Right.
looking back now, I'm like, "Wow, this is sex trafficking," but I had no clue
Yes.
it's in our communities. Because coming
Right.
from China, I was like, I'm here for my American dream. I'm, doing work and school and business and everything. Just never picture myself, being in kind of this kind of situation. But what was the situation back then? With the law, um, like was that even classified as human trafficking, or was that just like an assault, sort of a prosecution per se?
No, no, it wasn't called human trafficking back then. And to go back to what you just said, a lot of these streets, well, in particular these boulevards in certain areas have been hijacked by human trafficking and prostitution to the point where no female can walk down the street without being accosted, without being propositioned for sex, because these people that cruise these particular areas, every woman that they see, they believe to be a prostitute, right? So that's why you were accosted, because you didn't know any better. You didn't know what type of street you were on, but the person that propositioned you, they came there expressly for that purpose, right? And in the past, law enforcement viewed women and girls that were on these streets, selling their bodies. They viewed them as criminals rather than as victims, right? So what we've done now is when I say we, I'm talking about law enforcement. I'm not a member of it anymore. But what law enforcement has done now, they look at these women and these girls as victims and not as suspects of crimes, right? Law enforcement used to just do sweeps and just arrest all the girls on the street and charge them with crimes, and they get out They go back, law enforcement will come back through, arrest them, they get out, and it was rinse, cycle, repeat over and over in perpetuity, and nothing was being done. Even with, and it was hard to catch the pimps that were forcing these girls and women out on the streets. And even if they did catch them, the penalties were not severe, right? With human trafficking, the laws have been changed to the point where these men that are, forcing these women and girls to sell their bodies, now they can get 20, 30, even life in prison for doing that crime. So law enforcement and the laws are catching up with the true perpetrators behind human trafficking, which is these men and sometimes women that force women and girls to sell their bodies for them. So we're making progress. So law enforcement is making progress.
That's great. And again, thank you for all the work that you all do. It's a ever changing world, very sadly, that our people who we care about, and even our children, especially our children, are at high risk. But enough about my curiosity about your police career. Tell us more about the book. Again, it's very intriguing. Since Bloodbath, is it a religious book? What is it about? Like, is it your personal experience? Is it a fiction, nonfiction?
It's a true crime story that happened in 2008 in the city of Long Beach, California, where five unhoused people living in a homeless encampment were massacred by a gang member. And the story was very near and dear to me because I knew some of the victims. Because at the time I was a sheriff, a deputy sheriff, and I was assigned to a station not far from where it occurred. As a matter of fact, I lived less than a half a mile from where these murders happened. And like I said, I knew some of the victims. The investigators that were assigned to the case, one of them, Mark McGuire, is one of my best friends to this day. He comes by my house and we talk. We go on book signing tours together. His partner, Hugo Cortez, I knew him as well. I had worked on cases with him. And I wanted to write this story because I thought it was an important story because the victims were those members of our society that are often overlooked, that no one cares about. A lot of people say, well, they're just homeless. Who cares about them? Well, I cared about them, and I didn't want their story to go untold, right? So that's the main reason why I wrote the book, because I wanted people to understand who these victims were, that they had lives, that they had meaning, that there was meaning to their lives, that they have family members and friends that cared about them. So the book really goes into their day-to-day lives, how they lived before they were murdered. And some of the women that were involved, they weren't victims of human trafficking per se, but they had to sell their bodies to survive, right? And that's another aspect of prostitution in our society, that often goes, overlooked, right? It's like sometimes people have to do what they have to do just to eat, right? Just to get enough money to survive. And some of the people in the book were experiencing that, and I was able to document that and explain that, I think in a way that was respectful to the way that they lived. And the book also covers, how important the foster care system is in our society for children who have parents that don't care about them, because the case is also connected. Those five victims that were murdered in Long Beach, they're connected to a victim that was murdered 100 miles away in the desert, who happened to be a foster child, who ended up homeless as well. And he was murdered, and without giving away too much of the book, the two cases came together and they were connected by the investigators. And the title of the book, it's not religious per se, although there are some religious aspects to the book. And if I go too much into the title of the book or why I chose that particular title, it would give away a big part of the book. So I'm not going to get into the reason that I chose that particular title, but just for everyone listening, that title, you will really understand the meaning and significance as you read the book.
Like I said, I absolutely love the title. It's very intriguing. I myself recently finally finished the book, so I can relate to that because I was putting off. In my case, I'm a survivor, so it's a lot of re-traumatizing having to relive the experience writing this book. But like you, I have become to realize that I needed to have the book out. What if something happens to me and people have to hear this message? And but I just
Right.
absolutely loved this topic, and I cannot wait to read more about it and to see so what this is truly about. But I really want to thank you for bringing the voice, because I think that's what the International Book Awards is about. It's not just any book awards. It's not just for any book or any category, but rather, just like you said, who are victims of, in this case, homicide, or who didn't have a voice. In this case, they can never have a voice again. But because of
Correct.
you, they will have a voice. And because of
Yeah.
you bring to this, the attention of the world, say, okay, these are people, they have lives and they have a relationship just like us, except for they don't have homes. And what we can do, and makes people think. So with that, whether it's the book itself and or yourself, with all the great work that you do, if there's a call to action or takeaway for this interview, what would you leave it to our audience?
Well, I think that the Hope PYX International Organization is a great organization. I think that it's a necessary organization, and I wholeheartedly support everything that they do. I think their book award competition is spectacular. The first book that I wrote, Black, White, and Gray All Over, it's won 22 awards, the Hope International Book Award being one of them, and it was a finalist in 16 others, right? The Hope PYX was probably the most near and dear to my heart because of what that organization represents. Okay. So as far as the 22 book awards and the 16 finalists, nominations that my first book garnered, Hope PYX was one of the best. Okay. That's why when I wrote Saint Bloodbath, I knew that Hope PYX, I wanted to enter the award competition again, because a lot of things that are in Saint Bloodbath, even though it's a true crime book, a lot of things are germane to what Hope PYX represents and what they stand for.
Well, thank you for this. This really, this is what we believe as well, because we wanted to really help the people who are voiceless, help the communities, help the people who are underrepresented, or should I say non-represented. So
Yeah.
with what you said means so much to us, because only when we help all people, save all people, rescue all people, can we say that we really did the work? Just like the theme of the World Day Against Human Trafficking in Persons on July the 30th is "Leave no victim behind." So we must do this all. Collaborate. We must collaborate, whether, you're African American, I'm Asian, that person is Hispanic, or they're white. We must all work together on this. And because this is non-political, non-partisan, non-religious, and this is in order to make our world a better world, in order for our children, you have children,
Yes.
right? For our children to have
Yes.
a safe world, we need to do that. So I just cannot say enough, Fred, for the work that you have done to make our world a safer place. And today you have become a voice after you have been a hero for us to do the work. And And also thank you for the, your testimonial about the book awards, and we will continue to do the great work for our communities. And with that being said, you are listening to the Miss Texas Show. I am your host, Eileen Dawn, and our special guest for this show is Fred Reynolds. And he is a former police officer and now an author of multiple award-winning books. And we wish you best luck of this 2023 International Book Awards. And we will see you at the next episode.